What's up, y'all? Y'all are listening to Living Corporate's flagship podcast. If you didn't know, Living Corporate helps organizations build employee engagement and market trust through data analytics and data transformation, our e-learning platform, and brand marketing storytelling. We're so excited for you to be here today. The conversation you're about to hear is going to connect the dots between employee experience and go-to-market effectiveness. If you're not ready, get ready. Here we go. I mean, there's so many things I could say in terms of like how to introduce this person: executive, marketer, brand storyteller, mentor, speaker, leader. But I'm gonna just start by saying, Matt Story, what's going on, man? How you doing?
I'm good, brother. I'm good. I'm just happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this.
Oh, stop. Now look. Oh man. Okay. So it's interesting because and I've talked about this a lot on Living Corporate, like over the years. We have people, like we have, of course, activists, elected officials, executives, entrepreneurs, authors, influencers, educators. The list goes on. Like we've had these people, but we don't really have as many black male executives as I'd like, right? We just don't. Who are either willing, have the capacity, whatever reason you want to add, that come here. You have your own podcast that's focused on stories, and honestly, a lot of synergy with Living Corporate. I'm curious, like as someone who has your own podcast that really is about like understanding people's stories, have you had similar challenges? And if so, why? And if not, why do you think that is?
Well, I think we all have that challenge. Well, my mind goes in many ways, so let's break it down. I think when you think about representation and you think about the power of seeing someone doing what you have aspirations to do, like there's no value you can place on that, because seeing is believing. And so the minute that I say, I want to be president, I saw one, now I know I can do it. As opposed to not seeing one, then it's like, well, then how do I actually know that that's even feasible for someone like me? Mm. And it doesn't have to be, gender-based. It doesn't have to be race-based. It could be where you're from in the country. It could be with your experience, your background. I mean, there's many ways to divide it. But then I also think what's interesting when you put the lens of like executive, that like idea of like, I'm going into rooms that many people, there's people in my family that have never been in those rooms. Mm. So there was no way for them to prepare me for what I go through on a day in and day out basis. Now, yes, there's some fundamental values that we share. There's some work ethic that's obviously been ingrained and all those things. But in terms of having to navigate those things, then you have to kind of augment your community and find those people, which to your point, that's where it's even more important for those people to be out there. So I can actually say, hey, you know what it's like to be someone like me that has to leave every Friday to go to get a haircut because I can't show up and not be lined up. And, other people may not realize what that feels like. Other people may not know what that's going through. And so I think that it's unfortunate where there's they're not, we're not growing on trees. But I do think that everyone that I've ever come in contact with that I can share some form of experience with, I've been fortunate they've been able to pour into me. They've been able to like sit with me, share just a little bit of game of, hey, have you thought about this? Hey, you're killing it here. Hey, you should actually talk to this person. Hey, you should consider doing this. So I really see it's on us as individuals to find those people, even if they aren't as numerous as you and I would like them to be. We just got to find them wherever they are, turn over those stones, shake that LinkedIn tree and make those connections.
To your comment about getting a haircut every Friday, one of my biggest fears, Matt, is that, man, I'm going to get my shit pushed back. So, as I get a little older, I've been doing this thing around like, maybe I do 2 weeks, maybe I do 3, and I kind of rock the Denzel in the meantime.
Okay.
Prime Denzel, because Denzel, everybody, I don't know, man, like people got to pay attention. Like, the edge up is great. Edge ups are cool. salute to edge ups, but sometimes, man, just letting that just thistle a little bit.
A little bit,
Just
a
a
little
bit.
bit.
Okay,
Yeah.
now look, back
Yeah.
to it though, again, like I connected to you through a mutual, I would say a mutual, really great, a mutual friend,
Mm-hmm.
a colleague of yours at Visa. And, again, like I think it's funny when I think about brands, when I think about big organizations, sometimes brands can be so big, you kind of wonder, like, okay, what does a person do there? Right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so I think about like Nike. Okay, well, I know Nike sells shoes. I know they sell athleisure. I know that they again sports equipment. But like sometimes it's almost like the brand is so big, it's hard to imagine like what does an individual role look like. Visa is one of those brands to me, right? Of course, it's all over the world. Visa is a global brand.
Yep.
But what does it mean to work at Visa? Like, what is your role specifically? What are you doing there, like day to day?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the day to day changes. As you know, it's no day looks the same. But no, I sit in our marketing organization, and I'm focused on leading our global brand integrated marketing. I think that, most people have a general idea of what integrated marketing is, but, for those that may not be as familiar, that's really thinking about like, how do you take all the various activities of marketing and ensure one, they're strategically aligned to a larger, whether it's a strategy for an initiative or brand platform, or two, how do we ensure that they're actually effectively benefiting from each other? So a brand may go out and do a commercial, they may go do an influencer deal, they may do, an experiential pop-up. Those are different ways to activate, but how do you ensure that those things work together such that an end user that you're trying to influence, they understand what you're trying to take away, they understand what you're trying to do? And that's where integrated marketers, we kind of bring that magic together to take that expertise from the various channels and tie it together in a way that actually benefits the business, benefits the brand.
To your point about like a lot of times you think about marketing, it's like a bunch of different actions kind of all happening near around the same time, or maybe in some type of some type of sequential order.
Mm-hmm.
Um, looking at this year, right? We're recording this towards Q4, like we're headed that way. Um, a lot of organizations have been scaling back in terms of spend overall. Like, what are you seeing just as a brand as an integrated marketing as a storytelling executive, as a branding
Yeah.
executive? What are you seeing related to like the scale budgets being scaled back and things related to marketing? Like
Yeah.
do you think that that's been the same? Have we seen that same impact in that space? Have we seen that ratchet up? Like, I'm curious what
Yeah.
your view has been there.
Well, despite the baby face, I've been in this game for over 20 years. So I've seen these cycles happen in marketing over and over and over where, there's times, and again, people have different strategies. Some people say, when the industry is zagging to spend less, it's actually beneficial to spend more
Mm-hmm.
because you can have an outsized impact. Or, when things are, doing really well, economics wise, then people spend more. And so I don't think that I don't think there's a rhyme or reason saying like right now is different. I think we're always going to see those cycles that follow patterns of consumer purchase behavior. So as consumers are purchasing more goods, that industry will tend to go up. I would imagine those that are in the AI space are doing really well right now, so they're probably spending a lot. And so I think it's going to be industry specific. But again, I'm not an economist, so nothing I'm saying is going to be breakthrough
We'll put a little
in that
disclaimer in the
in that
corner or something.
realm.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
good.
exactly. But what I think is interesting from a marketing standpoint is this idea of how you market and how you actually reach the end person you're trying to influence. And because ultimately, as a marketer, we're in the business of changing behaviors of a target. What's interesting, I think, now is the competition is more democratized because of all these channels we have access to.
Yeah.
So now let's take Matt, marketer at Visa, is competing with Matt, podcaster, for attention.
Mm.
And again, Visa has a few more dollars. They can probably go a bit further. I'm not global with the podcast. There's some advantages. But when you start thinking about what there's a Matt podcasting in Japan, there's a Matt podcasting in Italy, there's a Matt podcasting in Mexico, then you start adding up like the collection of those people that are creating content, that are, putting messages out there, that are influencing communities, is actually at the same scale as your mega brands. And so I think why you've seen a lot of brands move into, influencer marketing, deals with creators, et cetera, is that they recognize it's much better to collab than it is to compete. And finding a way to be able to do that in connection to common objectives, common business goals, I think is what you're going to see more of, because it's not effective to try to outspend those people that are sitting in their house right now making amazing content that you and I are, after we get off, we're going to get on TikTok and we're just going to go, look at all these videos. Nobody's necessarily doing that for brands. And so I think that it's going to be this balance of how do you have your business objectives, what you're trying to achieve with your brand, what stories you're trying to tell, and connecting with those other people that are much more ingrained with where communities are going, where passions are going, where these channels are going. Because it's a full-time job to know what's the future of podcasting? What's the future of video creation? What's the future of, I was just doing a deep dive last weekend on SEO on YouTube.
Yeah.
Because it's like, these are things you have to be experts on if you're in these spaces.
It's interesting. I know when I came on your podcast, What's Your Story? And by the way, y'all make sure to check out the link in the show notes, learn all about Matt Stories podcast, which is fire. We talked a little bit about just like the future of work. Rather, I kind of rambled. Mm-hmm. Then you cut it up and made it look really nice. So, but here's what I'm curious about. Like, to your point, the idea of it's better to collab than it is to compete. First of all, I think that is I 100% agree with that. Just like as a person, I believe that mm-hmm. there's areas of collaboration with almost anybody out there. Now,
yeah,
whether you want to collaborate or not is a different conversation, but is there an opportunity to collaborate? I'd say there's like an overwhelming chance that there is. But what I'm curious about is when I think about the future of content creation, brand story, and really this brand storytelling piece, I'm curious about do you see a world where that function is largely outsourced, where it's hey, we're going to just work with a coalition of creators who are really specialized in these platforms, versus to your point about looking young, not necessarily being super young. Historically, it's been hey, we have these really big marketing teams. Yeah. Where do you see?
So I don't think it's I don't think outsourcing is the way to go, because strategically, it's the equivalent of you're just trying to hire the arms to do the things you can't reach. Mm. And ultimately, if you're always outsourcing, there's going to be a disconnect between someone that's ultimately delivering the thing and someone sitting inside the company that actually knows the strategy, they know the insights, they know the priorities. And so I think again, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but where you're going to move to is how do you set up that collaborative relationship such that someone that is on the ground as a content creator has an invested interest in the entity, the larger entity. And we talked about this on the podcast, this idea of full-time employment will look different in the future. And there will be ways to staff up and not necessarily have someone with a W-2 that's doing this work, but they're part of the entity such that they're actually, not only are they invested in the larger outcomes, but they actually see upside mm-hmm. in the larger outcomes. Because I think that's where you start cooking with grease and you start thinking about, oh, this isn't just a one-off thing where you hired me to do a couple posts.
Right.
You actually are letting me benefit from getting on this rocket ship that I'm hopefully helping to propel into the stratosphere of wherever you're trying to go as a company. And by investing in me understanding your business strategy, understanding your product pipeline, understanding, the ethos of what your brand stands for, I can make better content for you. And so that's where I think the collaboration has to go. And so it can't be just hey, let's go hire a bunch of TikTokers. Mm-hmm. It has to really be trying to figure out what are those connections you can make into the right folks that can be the extension of what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve.
Let's keep talking about your journey to Visa, right? What would you say led you there? And then part B is what's keeping you there.
Yeah. Well, those are two very different questions, and I'll pull them apart. So I think what's interesting about our journeys, especially for those that have, been in the game a couple of decades, like you tend to look backwards and you make a narrative around the disparate moments. When in reality, you couldn't have told me when I graduated from school. I went to Washington University in St. Louis, graduated with a computer engineering and computer science degree. You couldn't have told me 20 years into the future I was going to lead global brand integrated marketing for Visa. One, I wasn't a marketer. Two, I wouldn't have known what that job was, even though I wanted it. So I think it's very hard to say, like, I set out on this path. It was always going to be this job, and it's my dream job. I got there. I made it. What I think what led me here is there's a couple of things that have been principles I've applied everywhere that I've tried to add value. One is I've always gone to places where I was working with or for someone that I learned from. So I've always wanted to go somewhere and this goes back to even like high school. I remember working in the mall. I had this like part-time job, and I was working for like, a clothing store, and the manager just didn't know anything. And it frustrated me. Like, and again, like I'm working at the mall. It doesn't matter. I'm just there to see my friends, but I was like frustrated because I wasn't learning.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's always been, I can point to, I went to, this job, I learned from this person. I went to this job, I learned from this person. I went to this job, I learned. So that's always been a consistent thread. I think the other thing for me is I've always gone to places where I could solve unique problems. And so that's kind of to your second point of I've been at Visa for over 10 years. And that's kind of a rarity in today's day and age of somebody staying with one company for a magnitude of that time.
Yes.
And the reasons I've stayed is one, the industry is fascinating to me. And so when you think about payments and how it's evolved, it's different. The day I walked in 2014 to today, vastly different. And so again, that idea of continuing to learn, to need to understand how do consumers behave, how does the ecosystem, it's not even a four-party model anymore. There's so many other participants now that weren't there when I started. Two is when I think about like what I've been able to work on, the impact I've been able to have, it's evolved in every role that I've had. So I've worked in innovation marketing, I've worked in digital marketing, I worked in partnership marketing, I did product marketing while at Visa. And so it's like I've been able to get these different experiences, which has ultimately led me to be in a position where I can actually do this role now in a way that has the experience of being here, and obviously the experiences I had collected prior. But then I'm solving for something in a new way. I'm solving for these new challenges that we talk about of like, I'm not competing against big brands. I'm competing against somebody making TikTok videos. I'm competing against somebody that, came up with a brand new business idea. I'm competing against a podcaster. And again, competing using that loosely.
Sure.
When you think about attention. And so like that's what keeps me excited. That's what keeps me, engaged and, kind of running into every day of like, hey, what are we going to solve today? It's really about, problem solving.
You talked earlier about, Matt podcaster, Matt Visa executive. I'm curious, like what led you to build, because so here's what I've noticed, right? This is what I've noticed over the years, especially engaging in like with Black and brown executives. There's like this, there's almost like a playbook or a roadmap that these personas go down. So they come in, because these are typically like Gen Xers, young baby boomers, right? Like typically the people I'm talking to. Not a lot of millennials and Gen Z sitting in senior executive positions, even though there are a few, I understand. But by and large, you're talking about people 40 something and up. So they come in, they go to work, and they're in industry, just pure 9 to 5, hands on the wheel, 10 and 2 for 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years. Okay. Then somewhere along the line, they say, okay, I'm burnt out. I'm exhausted. I'm pivoting to the next thing. So their next life is typically like they're authoring a book, or they're doing public speaking, or maybe they do a podcast. But like what I'm saying is like, there's typically like, hey, I did this part. Now I'm about to do this part.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, what did it look like for you to make the decision to start something up, especially in brand storytelling, being a branding executive, marketing executive, and then like just what was that decision? And then two, what was it like navigating Visa to do that?
Yeah. So for me, the decision, it started in 2019. My wife and I, we had our youngest daughter. I was spending a lot more time listening to podcasts because I'm like walking her, trying to get her to go to sleep in the middle of the night. I have an AirPod in, and I'm like trying not to make noise, but I'm like, one of my values as a person is efficiency. So I'm like, how can I make this time efficient since I got to be up anyway? So like my podcast consumption went up. But what I found is the podcast I was listening to, if it was sports, to our earlier point, I would see somebody that looked like me. It would be a host that I have a somewhat I can relate to their experience. But if it was leadership, if it was career, if it was business focused, for most of them, I was listening to somebody that didn't look like me. And that, kind of like, I was like, I wonder why that is. And so again, because where podcasts are now versus where it was even back then, they've obviously taken off. There's so many different, diverse collection of hosts, but I didn't have them. And so I said, well, I guess I got to look into it, and I got to see what to do. And so I went and did what everybody does. I Google, how do you start a podcast? Bought a mic, and next thing I know, I'm like asking my friends, "Hey, you want to come on my podcast?" They're like, "Your podcast? Like, what are you talking about? You don't have a podcast?" Like, I do have a podcast. Look, here's my cover art. And so that was kind of the journey to starting. I think the thing that was interesting for me, that it may be helpful for others, is that when I started, though, I wanted to keep my work life and my home life separate. And I didn't, to your point, I didn't want somebody to assume, because I'm investing time and energy into this passion project, that means I'm taking away time and energy from the main thing, which is the job, the corporate, the thing that pays for, all this stuff, which pays for the podcast. and what I realized is I had a manager at the time that when she heard that I had a podcast, because the only conversation I had I went to my comms team, which I love our comms team. We work well together. And I was like, hey, I'm starting a podcast. Is that cool? And they said, well, are you going to talk about payments? I was like, no, why would I talk about payments? No, I'm talking about stories. Yeah. And they said, you're good. And so I checked that box, but I didn't talk to anyone else inside of Visa about it because, again, I tried to keep them separate. I started, posting things online, social media. People start to hear about it. And I had a manager that literally, she brought it up in almost every meeting we were in. So we'd be meeting with someone and she'd say, Matt has a podcast. Yes. It's great. You should listen to it. And at the time, I was like, why does she keep bringing it up? Like, it was like, almost like, it's like she was violating this separation of church and state that I was trying to hold on to. Yeah. But what I didn't realize is it was actually a differentiator from anyone else. So there's a lot of marketers in the world. There's a lot of marketers, in big corporations. How many of them have a podcast?
Nah, it's rare. Like to be like, from my perspective, I'm like, dang, first of all, this dude's name is Matt Story, and he leads brand storytelling. It's crazy. But then two, he works at like one of the largest payments companies in the world. And he also has his own pod. So when we got connected, I was like, yo, this is so crazy. Like, I find it very, very curious, like, and exciting. And I hope that people who are listening take some point of inspiration as it pertains to like, hey, like, it's possible. Because I think so often people, they say, man, I got to put in my time over here. And then, hey, I can't be honest, or I can't show so much of myself until after this part of my life is over. And I'm like, yo, first of all, I reject the premise of that. I just don't think that I cannot live like that. Yeah. But then two, it's like, no, like, don't shortchange yourself and don't put shackles on yourself before you even get started. Something you said also that's funny. So I worked at a consulting firm called PricewaterhouseCoopers. PricewaterhouseCoopers, for those who don't know, is like this big financial consulting accounting firm. Okay. Very stringent, very uptight. And so like people was found out I had a podcast, and they would quickly go, ethics and compliance. They sign off on that. Did you talk to so-and-so about that? And see, I didn't do what you did. Okay. Now I want to chalk it up to immaturity because I was like in my 20s. I came into the organization with my pod. Okay. And I told people I had a pod, and I just kind of would say, hey, I got a podcast. I'm not checking down with you about it. It's just more of like hey, I'm wearing a tie today. It is what it is. But man, it was curious because absolutely, to your point, there were people who made assumptions. Oh, well, wait a minute. Zach's podcast was featured on CBS This Good Morning or whatever, whichever one Gail was hosting. There's no way he could be doing that and also delivering quality work here. I don't care how good the work is, right? So it's
Yeah.
important, like what you just outlined, just of just going to somebody and saying, "Hey, look," like in the actual channel, not just saying it out loud. Like
Yeah.
kind of like
Yeah.
I feel like I kind of did the equivalent of I had declared bankruptcy on The Office when Michael Scott. I was like, I got a podcast, but you gotta actually, it'd be good if you care about long term and kind of keeping things cool. You gotta do that. But I also think though, like to the other point you made about your boss, like amplifying you at your boss at the time, amplifying you, it's the culture in which you operate. So it makes all the sense in the world, right? It's a huge differentiator for a marketing executive to have a podcast. It's a point of like, it could be an eyebrow raising for a change management professional who works in like this really regulated consultative space, who often also is talking about identity and the current state of affairs in the world and self advocacy and all these different things. It's so I think it's important.
Well, I'm gonna challenge that just a second.
Challenge me,
because I hear you. I hear where you're. I know why you're saying that, but so I've been thinking about this a lot over the past 5 years.
please.
80% of people leave some part of themselves at the door before they go to work. So I'll repeat that. 80% of people. That's not minorities. That's not people of color.
People.
That's not women. That's people. So 4 out of 5 people are saying, you know what? This part of me that's core to who I am, I'm just going to leave it here. I'm going to pick it up on the way out and I'm going to go do this job. And I think what we often, because we don't have this conversation, the conversations that you have on this pod, we're not having enough to realize we're all doing it. No matter what we look like, we all are covering up something. We're not sharing something because we think we're going through it differently. And like for me, one of the examples of this is like I found growing up, I grew up with a single mother. I didn't want for anything. Now, did I have everything under the sun? No, I never got Jordans. That's why I have them now. But there was not like I was deprived.
Yeah.
Education, food, sports, I did it all. But I covered that part of me up for so long and I never talked about it because I didn't want anyone to look down on me the same way that someone may say, I can't talk about, I'm writing a book. Ooh, I can't talk about the fact that I actually fly airplanes on the weekend. Ooh, I'm a DJ for blah, blah, blah. And what I find fascinating is there's so many parts, as you even started with the intro, there's so many parts of what makes us who we are that if we don't bring that to whatever it is we do for work, because we all have to work, that we're actually missing out on connections. We're missing out on creating synergies into how we can bring that other thing into our job. Because I guarantee you, I know what it takes to produce a podcast. I know what it takes to promote a podcast. I know what it takes to get on all these algorithms and try to like tweak them. That makes me a better marketer. Mm-hmm. I know what it takes to raise a family, to not miss their sporting events, to, prioritize the main thing because my mom did that. Mm-hmm. And so like there are these things that we're ashamed of. We think people are going to judge us, that you kind of got to throw that judgment to the side because people are going to judge you regardless.
Yeah.
Like people are going to see you, they're going to see me, and they're going to have a judgment. My job is to show them the full, the Shrek, we're onions, to show them all the layers of I'm a podcaster, I'm a marketer, I'm a girl dad, I'm a husband, I'm a good friend. Like, what do you want? I'm from the Midwest. Like, what do you want to talk about? Because I love sneakers. I love Peloton. Like pick a topic. Mm-hmm. Like, let's go deep on one of these topics. Cause I guarantee any person I meet, we're going to have more in common than we have apart. But I think we can sometimes, it's almost like we create this cutout of who we expect to be when we walk through that door. Mm-hmm. And anything that doesn't fit that cutout, we put to the side, which is actually is detrimental to us. And it's detrimental to whatever organization we're working with because they're not getting the full you. They're getting the diet version of you because you've taken part of it out.
We agree. I think my only, and here's the thing, right? So to your point about, and your experience, right? Like you have been in corporate and have done well, right? Like you're a senior executive, like you out there, you are Matt Story, right? I would say if you were to engage younger people to your point earlier,
Mm-hmm.
like not even necessarily differentiating on race and gender or any other lived experience, younger people, they would say something different. And they might
Yeah.
share stories or experiences of their attempt to talk about other things that they do. And that quickly not just becoming like interesting fact, but like
Yep.
that becoming like a point of demerit. So
Correct.
quick example, like I worked at another consulting firm, and I remember one of the, this a consultant. And for context, a young white woman. In fact, all of us were like, the whole team was actually pretty young. All of us were like under like 27. I think I was like 24 at the time. I was pretty young. But anyway, one of the other people was like, "Hey, I do events on the weekend. I'm an event coordinator. I have my own small events coordination business. Something real cute, not to be dismissive of whatever she was doing, but just." And I remember our project manager being like, "We might need to find somebody else on this project because she's not focused.
Prioritizing.
She's not prioritizing." And so so I agree with everything you said. I think I ask myself for, like, at Visa, perhaps the organizational culture is different, or rather it's a culture of welcome, or there's more of that, to be an openness of, this is cool. Because I don't know, Matt, if you worked at like Deutsche Bank, or if you worked at BlackRock, or whoever else, before I mess around and lose their sponsorships, that they would necessarily be as excited about their person that they're paying total comp X to not all be all in at their brand. You know what I mean?
But let me say three things. So first and foremost, I 100% agree with you. I've earned a certain level of capital that allows me to move in ways that not everybody can move. Mm-hmm. So you are 100% correct. Because I've put in the time, because I have the experience, because I have the reps, I can do things that other people can't do. And I'm aware of that, and it's unfair, but I'm aware of that.
Yep.
I think the second thing I would say, and it's where let me say that for the third. But the second thing I would say is you also have to be aware of not every hour is created equal. So an hour of my time is not equal to an hour of someone else's time because of that experience,
Facts.
because of that wealth,
Let's talk about it.
And as an entrepreneur, this. Yes. When somebody asks you to do something, your hourly rate isn't just for the hour that you're there. Mm-mm. It's the prep, it's the reps, it's the experience you already have. That's what you're paying for. And so people need to understand. And again, that's not just a thing that's tied to, oh, I went and got my MBA from here, and I, worked at, Visa, all these consulting. Like, that's not it. Like the thing I always tell people, like, as a parent, you move differently, and you know how to balance things, you know how to integrate things, you know how to, like, those are skill sets that you have that you should tap into, that you should charge people for. So I think there's also like knowing your rate and knowing what you're worth and holding to that. And then your point on like the culture of an organization, I think that some of that is at the corporate level, but a lot of that falls to team leaders, and it falls to managers, and it falls to people that there are going to be people that look at it and they're jealous, and they're like, why do we got to talk about his podcast again? Like, why are we bringing this thing back up?
Yeah.
But there are going to be other people that, as you mentioned, are kind of, they're trampolines, and they're going to see this like, oh, that's cool. I'm glad you're doing that. Let me introduce this. And so I would encourage people. And again, we've had enough conversation. I know you think like this. You got to read that room, and you got to know, like, am I in a room of trampolines so that I can share more, and they're going to, prop that idea up, or they're going to put me in a position to connect dots that I didn't see? Or am I in a room of like, I need to watch my back a little more, and I may not need to share all of those details about what I was doing this weekend or why I stayed up till 2 a.m. to do the thing. And so like that becomes a little bit of a self-awareness piece that, again, you've been in the game long enough, you have some of that you're aware of how I can share that, what rooms I can share them, what other rooms I can't. Because yes, some of that is organization, but some of it does come down to the individual and being able to, kind of assess, if you will.
There's this balance that I hear you continuously drive, which is really helpful and a good reminder of like, there's personal responsibility and then there's organizational systemic accountability and responsibility as well. it's funny, Matt, like Living Corporate's been around for a while. Um, we started as a singular podcast. Now we have these three verticals between like our brand storytelling and our data analytics and our larger e-learning platform. And believe it or not, oftentimes people just in initial networking discussions or in just like looking at looking at a LinkedIn picture will reach out to me and say, hey, so like you make content for DEI, right? Or you make content just for Black people, right? And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
no, like that's, and I don't, and it's funny because I think like there's racist, there's bigoted, there's ignorance, there's malicious. I think that things can be various things and not all the things at the same time. It's like, man, that's just really ignorant. Like to just presume that like, just because I look like this, I'm only making content for Black people, only talking about things that are relevant to Black people. Or that there's content that's even like solely exclusively relevant to one group of people. We're all people.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, when it comes to DEI, quote unquote DEI, and for the sake of this like discussion, I want to flatten that a bit further because now since it's become so politically charged, any initiative or content or discussion or anything, media or anything that is not white male centered, like there continues to be like this hesitancy, right? Like we're having all sorts of conversations right now, and even just my own colleagues, people in my network are saying, "Hey, we're kind of waiting till after the election if we figure out what we're going to do." Blah blah blah. What do you see the future of marketing that is inclusive of different stakeholder groups, right? So Black and brown folks, women, queer folks, disabled people. Where do you see the future of integrated marketing being with large brands as more and more tension around quote unquote DEI continues to ratchet up?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I want to go into this rabbit hole, but I just struggle with the idea of like DEI is not one thing, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually had a conversation with someone on my podcast about this, and like he broke it down really well around this. Like it's actually 3 different practices.
Mm-hmm.
And so for us to like simplify it to an acronym, squeeze it together, and put it on the shelf as a thing that's like causing tension, like that's a whole like we need to pull that apart. We need to talk about that.
Uh-huh.
That said, I'll get to your question of I think that, you know, where marketing is going, integrated marketing is going, is it's all about community building. Now, if you have a product, service, solution that you're trying to get a certain audience to engage with, purchase, etc., you need to be authentic to that community. And I don't think any marketer that's worth their, you know, their weight in salt, like they need to know that where everything is going is, one, we have way more in common than we have apart as people. 2, we're all more interconnected as things move forward. So you have to be inclusive of those communities you want to reach. Like, I think that, you know, if I'm selling hammers to left-handed people, there's going to be a lot of left-handed people that look different, have different scenarios I need to be inclusive of. And you just need to plan that way, which again, I don't think if you sat across from a marketer and, you know, ask them about their strategies, like it would come across that like, you know, all the values they stand for are going to be, we care about these people, we're inclusive of this, we want to ensure we're making their lives better. That's probably on every marketer's playbook in some words or another. So I think it's inherently going to be embedded. I just think that it becomes a lightning rod, as you started with, that people just don't want to go there. I don't want to debate it because like it's a faulty debate to begin with. So why are we going to spend our time and energy on it? Let's talk about the thing that, you know, you're there to do, the job you're there to do, and figure out how to do it best. So yeah.
No, so helpful. I appreciate it. Like I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about your work and the work you're leading at Visa related to content creation and content creators. So it was interesting when you and I first, after we got introduced, and then we just did like a quick networking, what's up call. Mm-hmm. You were at an event like rife full of content creators, people who have millions of followers and clicks, blah, 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 blah. And I'd love to get your perspective on like, if you're thinking about a partnership or like some type of, either if it's an influencer partnership or even just like an additional vendor to help tell stories at at a company like a Visa, like, right, like this is not about not just Visa exclusive, but again, like you sit in these spaces. So if I'm confident that you understand or have a perspective on the parameters of what a good partnership looks like. What are you looking for? Because so I think so often for independent creators, there's this perception that outside looking in that like if you're a creator or you're an influencer, everybody has hundreds of thousands of followers or millions of followers, right? Or hey, like, you know, you're in these spaces. There's like this persona that I think a lot of creators and influencers pressure themselves to kind of fit into. But like if you were to give it at a high level, like what are the things, especially as we think about like 2025 and beyond, what are the things that you would be looking for in terms of that vendor or individual influencer when it comes to like a corporate type sponsorship? Like what are those things for you that stick out for you?
I think it comes down to, it's very simple. It's equitable value exchange. So I'm actually going to answer your question in a reverse way.
Give it to me.
A brand reached out to me about wanting me to be an ambassador on their behalf, which was very fascinating for me because, to your point about where I sit in my day job, I got to kind of see it on the other side. And I ultimately didn't go forward with it because I felt that what they were offering was not equitable value exchange. Now, I don't have hundreds of thousands, millions of followers. Although I will say, I don't know if I told you this. One of our videos from when you were on my pod went like over 1.6 million impressions or something like that, the most I've ever seen.
Well, let's hold on. Hold on. Everybody stop. Stop your car. You driving? Stop what you're doing. You walking your child? Park your stroller. Put the emergency brake on the stroller. You heard that right now. You heard this senior executive at Visa who has a podcast that he had me on his personal podcast, my face and my voice. Okay, keep going, Matt. Go ahead. I just want to make sure we slowed it down for him. That's all.
Over 1.5 million people saw that face and the words and the wisdom you dropped.
Goodness.
But what I'm getting to is that I don't have like, you know, Mr. Beast numbers. However, I'm bringing value that not every other person has. And I needed them to understand the value I was bringing because I am a marketer.
Right.
Because I do have an understanding of the power of storytelling because, and you know, all the other things they were introduced for a specific thing. I won't get into the details because it'll become very obvious who the company is. But anyway, I decided to pass. And for me, as I then go back into my hat as a marketer, I can't just look at people as like the clicks or the numbers of impressions or the number of things they have. I need to think about like, what's the equitable value exchange? And some of that is writing a check and in exchanging for what they're going to provide, content or what have you. But there's other things that we can provide that, hey, where are you trying to go? Who are you trying to meet? Who are you trying to be in the rooms with? Right. Can I help there? Is there an area of expertise that you don't have that I could potentially connect you with someone because those are resources that we have? And so I think it just comes down to that equitable value exchange. And again, I go back to what we just said previously, like you got to know your price. And your price is inclusive of all the things you bring to the table. It's not just about the clicks. It's not just about the number of followers. There's more things that you probably, as a content creator, that you bring as value. And there's more things you bring as a brand that aren't just writing the check. And you need to be having those conversations because if you build a relationship, again, a partnership becomes a relationship when you build it that way. And then you actually see more value out of it than you would have of just saying, hey, make me 3 shorts and, you know, have it here by October 31st. Like that's not going to work.
No. And so first of all, thank you for that answer, because I think also, and you talked about earlier about how you're part of your job, but in your expertise is understanding how these algorithms are changing, but they are changing at a rapid pace. And it does seem that it's getting more and more obvious that you're going to need to pay right now. It doesn't mean that you can't be Mr. Organic like Zach and Matt's story. Because maybe if you strut go, maybe you can. Okay. Maybe, but there's budgets. There's budgets, man. Look, man, I'll tell you, man, I remember I worked at SurveyMonkey for a while. Right before actually my second daughter was born. And I remember just asking questions like, hey, can you help me get my social? Can you help me get Living Corporate's Twitter verified, get the badge? This is before, you know, Elon took over and messed everything up. And so, but they were like, hey, you know, we got that because we spent right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
They were like, we spend like, I think at the time it was
Pay to
like
play.
a few hundred bands. It might have been like more than that, Matt, right?
Yeah.
And then it was like, hey, we spend, and like I remember we would do these campaigns, and we would see like these just the social media campaigns and the campaign ad spend. I mean, Matt, you're talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then when you do the analysis of all these impressions and clicks, it's like, okay, and then how much did that generate in like business? And
Yeah.
it wasn't always a pretty number.
Yeah.
And so I receive that like it has to be more than that. It needs to, and for me, so much it's about like, and I remember I was having a conversation. We had a client for several years, a global pharmaceutical client. And I told them off top, I said, listen, I'm not the Joe Budden podcast. I'm not the Breakfast Club. So when you see 60, 70,000, 100,000 listeners a month to this podcast, to Living Corpus podcast, it's like, hey, we can create content and it's going to reach that, but y'all are also worth billions of dollars. So if y'all wanted to spend, y'all could easily capture more, and faster, right? I said, so for us, what we can provide is the stories that we're going to be able to tell and the way we tell them, and what we're going to be able to pull out of your leaders is going to be that differentiated. And then you can use our content on your huge machine to help provide right. But that's the discussion. I think and I think brands, I just love what you said about like the exchange, because yeah, it's a check, but like the truth of the matter is I know my price. So my prices are going to be such that it's like, okay, well, I have other things going on. What are all the things, my time, what is my time worth, and what could I also be doing with this time? Because that's also part of your price, what that you fold into your rate. And so it's like, I think so many brands today don't appreciate, hey, we can connect you with these people. We can help you build this relationship here. Yes, we're going to cut a check because honestly, a lot of times, especially for like historically marginalized creators, it'd be like a rounding error anyway. So, but I think it goes both ways. I'm gonna take some sauce you got. So it's not just, it's on both sides. So it's on the brand. It's on the brand to understand, hey, what are the points of value, and listening for those points of value in addition to paying equitably. But then it's also on that creator or small business to be explicit with like, hey, I saw that y'all do this over here. What does it look like for us to participate in this way? But I love this idea of just being more open on both sides. It can't just be, I'm going to a brand and if you just get a paycheck, and again, I'm not trying to, because this is going to sound privileged, right? Because everybody's in different financial places. But if you're only getting a paycheck, Matt, from these huge brands, and you're not getting connected to something else or an event or having your logo somewhere, or having them even just like just like lowest hanging fruit, them retweeting you on something, like, then you're missing out, man, because that money going to come and go.
Yeah. But the one thing I'll build on it is that brands are built on relationships.
Yeah.
So whether it's Visa brand or it's the Matt Story brand, it's built on relationships. And the thing that I think we sometimes fail to realize in both instances is that's a hand-to-hand game. Like, you can't build relationships at scale. Like, the reason that I was so excited to meet you is because the person that connected us, Celinda, I know what she's about, and we have a relationship. And I know that she's into collecting dope people.
Yeah.
So when she says this person is dope, that came with a certain level of like, okay, this is worth my time. Because again, that's what we're always trading. We're not trading money. We're trading time. And ultimately, I was willing to trade the time to connect. We connect, and I'm like, oh, not only did you meet the bar of what I was expecting, but it exceeded. So let's spend some more time together, and let's figure out, what are you doing? What am I doing? How can I help you? And again, equitable value exchange. And I think we don't realize, whether you're a creator, you're a small business, you're a big brand marketer, like, what are those relationships you're building? Because I guarantee, if you're a creator, and I'm going to make it up, you're working with a marketing director for a top, 500 brand. What happens when that marketing director goes somewhere to be a VP? Mm-hmm. You think that if you had a good interaction, they're going to think about you? They're going to bring you along? Yes. Mm-hmm. What happens when they become a CMO? Mm-hmm. Like, those things are happening. It happens. And if you're not investing in those relationships, to your point, if you just took the check you're missing out. And like you're playing checkers while other people are playing chess.
100%. And you know, I'm really on that. I think because again, you know, some of it is just the benefit of age, man. You know, you get a little older, you're like, look, man, these relationships, it's what matters. Because
Yeah.
I've seen, especially in this market, right? I'm seeing a lot of people who were just at the Congressional Black Caucus event with the tux on and looking nice, and they ain't got no job today,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So in those moments, or when you feel like when the tides are shifting and changing, where are your relationships and where can you pivot more smoothly so that those things aren't so it's not so rough, right? I think that's a critical piece. Look, we've had you here. I told you I was going to honor your time, okay? And I meant that. So, Matt, before we let you go, I'd love to hear your just 3 points. So first of all, it could be 3, it could be 5, whatever you got, I'll take.
Okay.
Points of advice for organizations seeking to build trust, like build customer trust through effective storytelling. Like what are the things you would tell them?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, you got to start with who are you? Like you got to do the work. You got to understand what is the organization about? What does it stand for? And this isn't just like coming up with a brand house. Like you got to actually do the work. And that's both internal and external, because you could sit within the walls of in your HQ and think you're about this. But if you go talk to your customers and they say you're about something else, there's a gap and you gotta figure that out. So I think first and foremost, you got to do that work. I think the second thing I would say is recognizing the beauty of storytelling is it activates both sides of the brain. So when I tell you a story and I give you facts and data, that's one side of your brain. But when I give you the story around what was happening when those facts were happening, that's why you remember it, because it evokes an emotion. It evokes a feeling of like, oh, I did remember that time when that happened. That reminds me of the time when I went through something similar. And so I think remembering that storytelling truly it's an art, and it's something we have to practice. It's something we have to continually use, and we got to continue to do. And then lastly, I would just say like, you gotta listen to the people that are in the rooms you want to be in. So if you're a company that's going after, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, like you got to find some people in those rooms and listen to them, because what you did to me, you took what I said and you said, well, let me tell you what the younger people feel. And I have to check that, because I'm not in that room. I don't know what it feels like to be entry level and not, having to wear church shoes and, tuck it in polos and whatnot. I don't know what that feels like, because I don't do that. But you have to listen to the people that are in those rooms so you can actually have that empathy. You can have that understanding. You can know how you're trying to connect with them. You can know what, and the funny thing is most of organizations have those people in their actual company already. You're paying them. Tap into them. Ask them questions. Like for me, that's that whole idea of like reverse mentoring. Like how can you go and actually learn from them and also, be able to contribute and help them along where they're trying to go.
Matt, it's been a pleasure. Again, storyteller, leader, speaker, podcaster, gamer, sports aficionado, sneakerhead, executive. I'm stumbling over the words at the end because I'm just so excited about this conversation. I appreciate you. You're always welcome back. We'll talk to you soon, brother.
I appreciate you.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.